Hi, I'm Sarah Ormany, and you are listening to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series, Beyond Your Narrator episode.
Today, we're very happy to have Brian ODonnell from Zoo Digital. He's the Director of English Services, and we're going to find out all about what that means. This is Roy Samuelson interviewing Brian ODonnell. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's jump right in. What do you love about audio description?
Well, I think for AD, as opposed to a lot of what we end up doing in our space is the creative aspect. It tends to open up a lot of conversations with the script writers. It becomes a really, really collaborative process, discussing, a lot of us, in the English department, it's a lot of wordsmithing. So a lot of us, we're trying to figure out the right word to describe a certain situation because we want to maintain objectivity and, without giving too much away necessarily, but still want to be accurate. And there's a lot of best practices and rules we have to follow. So a lot of times it's deciding whether or not it makes sense to even break some of those rules because everything that we do, everything that's produced out there, these stories that come out of Hollywood and elsewhere, you have to break some of the rules to have an accurate description. The research involved is really fun. Some of us are kind of nerdy like that and like to get, down and dirty with Google. We had a situation just recently, actually. There was a vintage studio logo that had an old propeller plane flying across a globe. In the original description we got, it described it as a single-engine turboprop plane. Our script editor, he was QCing the script and went in and did some research. And he's like, well, the turboprop plane wasn't actually invented when this logo was being used. This is a logo from the 40s, and a turboprop plane is apparently a jet-propelled propeller, and the jet engine wasn't invented yet. So it's actually a single-engine propeller plane. So some of this really, really detailed stuff comes out, just all the different types of content there is, all the different stories that are being told, and we're just want to be sure that we're completely accurate and giving the best possible picture and experience. And then another one of the things that kind of makes this unique for our space is, we're able to separate ourselves a little bit from a profit motive. This being, obviously with, we're a publicly traded company, of course. So there's a profit motive behind anything and everything that we do. And so it's always there. But with these accessibility formats, I think they become passion projects for a lot of the people involved. They understand what these things are being used for. Everyone knows that what they're involved in is important. Everyone loves film. So being able to be a part of this, first of all, lets the creatives and the storytellers behind these films and TV shows, it lets their content reach a greater audience. But it also lets the blind and low vision consumer fully immerse themselves in this. And I think that's always behind, in the back of the mind of everybody that's working on this stuff. And so, there's things that I really like about it. There's things that I know my script writers, adds a lot of passion to what they do.
It's great to hear that word immersion, specifically for the audience, that all this collaborative process that you're mentioning, every bit of research and that specificity, taking out the word turbo because it didn't exist at the time. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I laughed out loud when I saw that email. That's a good catch.
Nice. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the experience of the talent on your team, specifically what background they have that's been really useful in this audio description work, and maybe some things that have been maybe needs to be kind of undone and retrained specifically for this work?
Yeah. So naturally, when we try to find script writers, we're looking for people. I think a background in journalism really helps because a lot of what they, at least what ideally, in an ideal world, when they're training journalism, they're looking for objectivity, right? And that's a lot of what you're trying to do in AD, the dragnet, just the facts. So that's a big thing. Creative writers as well. Training is definitely the most difficult thing, and with any of the accessibility formats, because naturally it's fully studied people who have to create this script, but you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the consumer here. And, you don't want to over-describe. You want to be able to let sound design, especially, speak for itself. So this is kind of some of the training hurdles. And especially when you're getting into the creative writers, they tend to throw a little bit of flourish into their writing a little bit. And sometimes, it becomes a little bit editorializing. Is somebody happy or is somebody smiling? You don't want to try to over describe in that way, just the facts. So those are kind of the people I look for, and then the training hurdles that we really try to hammer into these people's skulls when they're writing this stuff. Going back to immersion, just trying to be a little bit a part of that community, obviously, through either like third-party training resources. We've sent some people to some training retreats before where they get to really talk scripts through with a blind or low vision person to really get their perspective on how they're using these things. So those are really helpful. And, online research, the different groups out there that are really advocating for this, kind of reading the white papers and whatnot that they're putting out and different training resources, really, really important to make sure people are kind of up to speed on the current trends.
It sounds like there's a lot of ongoing research.
For sure. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. So, just trying to stay up to date, and especially as the the FCC and the government gets a little bit more involved with dictating standards, it's going to be increasingly important that everybody stays on top of what the current trend is, and even geographically as well. The way they do things in Europe is slightly different from what we're doing in the U.S. And even in the U.S., organization to organization, it's slightly fragmented.
That provides its own challenge in trying to find that balance, I bet.
Exactly.
You mentioned sound design. If we could talk a little bit about that, that seems like something that I'd imagine the comparison is almost a dance between the audio description narration and the sound design, that both can work together or maybe one feeds the other. Can you talk a little bit about how sound design can influence the writing of the script?
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that you'll see from clients or studios who maybe aren't too familiar with AD in their QC departments. They're expecting anywhere where somebody's not speaking, that there's going to be a little bit of AD narration. And that's not the case, the sound of silence, right? Sometimes
let it breathe.
Yeah, exactly. You can take a lot away from just letting the film speak through its sounds. So silence is not necessarily a bad thing. Could be for dramatic effect, dramatic pauses. You think of somebody walking through like a scary dark forest, what does the sound really convey to the user as far as tone and emotion? We hear leaves and sticks crunching underfoot. We hear an owl in the background and maybe some wind howling through the trees. A lot of that can go a very long way in describing a setting. So, maybe a very simple description just in a forest and then just let the sound go. Or maybe it makes sense for this particular thing. Every film is different. Every story is different. Maybe the sound tells the story itself. So a lot of these things, it's really having that, your finger on that creative pulse of what's intended by the filmmakers and specifically the sound engineers and the sound designers for a film versus what the intended audience is going to be able to take away from all that design without speaking any more to it.
Yeah, and it sounds like the end result of those efforts is parity with sighted audiences. One of my favorite stories is hearing a audio description audience member with someone else who was sighted, and that they were both able to laugh at the same time at the same thing. That's a form of connection, great. And it sounds like that's what you're addressing with this. So. Yeah,
and I grew up actually. My dad always had a NPR on, at night, and they would have the old radio dramas. So I need to find some of those to give to new scriptwriters, because I think what they did in the 20s, 30s, and 40s with radio drama, you listen to the sound design in those, because they have detective stories, they have science fiction stories, and it's the same sort of thing. There's no picture. They're not describing a guy walking into a church or something. You're hearing a door creak. You're hearing footsteps on marble. And I think we can take a lot of stuff from old radio dramas when going into AD.
When it comes to audio description, where it is now, and maybe where you'd like it to go, can you talk a little bit about some directions that either you or your company would like to see happen with audio description?
Yeah. Obviously, I'd love to see everything have audio description. First of all, it goes back to profit motive, of course. It's more work for us, right? So there's a little bit of a greediness there. But the more stuff, like you mentioned before, about the sighted person and the low vision person being able to laugh together at the same time, people in these communities being able to have the same experience. Everybody loves film. Everybody watches film and TV, and making sure that there's some equity there, and everybody's is able to experience things in more or less the same way. So seeing this, and it's moving this direction. We're seeing it with a lot of studios having AD available on launch day. For the streaming platforms, for Blu-ray and DVD, obviously, because they've got plenty of time to get that stuff out on the shelves. In the theatrical space, and really going through the catalog as well. Titles that are really pervasive in society, shows like Seinfeld or like MASH, these things. And I know Seinfeld, I think has AD. MASH, I don't know, but any of these things that maybe going back in catalog, they seem to be kind of an afterthought for a lot of people. And I think just pushing for better, more comprehensive requirements on these and educating studios that there is a need and you can make some money on this. Why not?
Just now with educating the studios, do you feel like there's an influence there that you can have with, I call it cinema to streaming? The audio description travels from the theater to wherever it goes, or is that kind of outside and really on the distributor side?
It's a tricky question. I mean, it's probably a number of things, especially COVID has a big effect right now, especially on the theatrical space, and things are getting dumped straight onto OTT. I think it's kind of all up in the air. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what organizations like the FCC are mandating that these people do. Because at the end of the day, it does cost money. But, some studios, they are passionate about this as well. They want to make sure that their stories can be consumed by the greatest audience possible. So I'm not trying to rag on the studios or anything and say that this is purely a profit motive for them as well. I know it's not. But I think, a lot of the theatrical stuff, especially depending on how high profile it is, it's going to be made up front. And I know for a lot of our OTT clients, we're creating AD for them so that it's ready, it's out there when the title launches. That's a great thing. Again, I just think it's going to be basically whenever we have really stringent requirements on this stuff. I mean, I think that's really when you're going to see this stuff really start to more readily available.
Let's go back to the conversation about the training of some of your writers. That you mentioned retreats or audio description feedback from blind audiences. Do you find that there is an influence of blind audiences with the work you do, either through your own research or otherwise?
Yeah, for sure. So, the American Council of the Blind, they have their audio description project, and through there we actually sent one of our scriptwriters to a training retreat and everything. So she was able to actually work very closely. But, in talking to my writer, when we get into these conversations and these collaborations about, scripts and word choice and why did we describe here and not here, use this word or that word, she's constantly bringing up stuff that she learned in that retreat. And I think without having done something like that and without having been involved in the community in some way, you're going to struggle. You're not going to get it right. Maybe not immediately. It's going to come through a lot of feedback. And then the feedback you're getting 99% of the time is going to be from a sighted QC person, at your point of delivery. So the only other feedback you're going to get is when it's out there in the consumer space and the audience complains. And at that point, you never want to be in that position. So yeah, a lot of that stuff does come up, and just through the various, best practices documents and, like I mentioned before, white papers and various other resources that people are putting out can help give context. But I think really need to be involved in some way with the blind or low vision community to really, have the best possible success rate and be able to offer the best possible experience.
Sounds like that's a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audiences?
One thing just keep in mind with all of this is I mentioned it's a creative process, creativity, subjective. So that, there's a lot of things that we try to do and try to do right within the context. But at the end of the day, every person's going to have a little bit of a different take on what to describe, why to describe it, where to describe it. So just bear that in mind. I mean, we're turning a film into a radio drama or an audiobook, or kind of the ways that I describe it. And then that's the big challenge with the clients as well. As I mentioned, QC people, it's a very subjective thing. And at the end of the day, somebody likes it or somebody doesn't like it. So, we do our best to be in the column. But
Brian, how can people reach you, either on social media or reach your company?
Yeah, zoodigital.com is our website.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.